This 5-color deck is a legendary human tribal build that achieves victory through combat. The majority of the creatures in the 99 of this build are legendary humans, and the rest of the deck is sculpted around enhancing the corresponding legendary and human synergies. The general for this build has the capability of acting as a win condition out of the command zone. Optimizing combat aside, our board state also was enhanced by the presence of Joda through his ability of casting various legendary spells without paying their mana costs. These abilities, coupled with the underlying legendary and human synergies crafted in the 99, allow us to take advantage of two powerful archetypes in one build. As a bonus, the flavor and power of this build will only strengthen as more and more legendary human spells and legendary matters synergies are printed. Hello and welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. Joda, the Unifier, is a 5/5 legendary human wizard for WUBRG mana. He gives legendary creatures we control +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures we control. Whenever we cast a legendary spell from our hand, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. We may cast the card without paying its mana cost. Then we put the rest of the cards on the bottom of our library in a random order. In the following deck tech, you're going to see Joda helming a 5-colored legendary humans build, where the legendary synergies and the human synergies will work together to create a very powerful tribal deck. These are the legendary humans that are included in the 99 of this build. We begin with Niambi, Esteemed Speaker. She's a 2/1 with Flash for Azorius colors, and when she ETBs, we may return another target creature we control to its owner's hand. If we do, we gain life equal to that creature's converted mana cost. Niambi could come down at instant speed and save one of our humans that's being targeted from spot removal, or perhaps it's a mass removal spell and we don't want that creature to leave the battlefield. Niambi can come down, sacrifice herself, and bounce that creature back to our hands. We're looking at you, Joda. You're most likely going to be targeted early, often, and frequently. But that's not the only ability that Niambi has. We can pay 1 and Azorius colors and tap Niambi and discard a legendary card to draw 2 cards. This is a deck that has a very strong legendary theme woven alongside the human theme. So Niambi's ability to, let's say, promote card advantage by discarding 1 card to draw 2 should also help if we so choose to need her on the battlefield for the purposes of just getting some more cards into our hand after she's been flashed in to protect or save one of our other creatures. Next, we have Reki, the History of Kamigawa. It's a 1/2 for 2 and a green, and whenever we cast a legendary spell, we draw a card. Now, we are a tribal deck, so we want to make sure that we maintain tempo in the early, mid, and late portions of the game. In so doing, having as many peripheral draw effects is going to help us to accomplish that feat. We've already seen Niambi offer us that ability, and now Reki will as well. Creature number 3, staying with a mana value of 3, we have Sisay, Weatherlight Captain. She's a 2/2 for 2 and a white, and she gets +1/+1 for each other color among other legendary permanents we control. Joda himself will make Sisay a 7/7. We may pay WUBRG mana and search our library for a legendary permanent card with CMC less than Sisay's power and put that card onto the battlefield. This doesn't necessarily give us card advantage in our hands, but it does give us battlefield advantage, and as long as we can find some creatures in our deck, and that should not be a problem. Sisay begins as a 2/2, and the more and more permanents that we surround around her with different colors, the more varied our options are for fetching them onto the battlefield. Sisay will help us to populate our side of the battlefield with our various legendary humans, and in addition to maybe a couple of other cards that will help out our themes. Staying with the exact mana value of 2 and a white, we have Thalia, Heretic Cather. She's a 1/2 with first strike. Creatures and non-basic lands our opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. This is fantastic for slowing down Voltron builds. This is fantastic for slowing down fetch lands that come into play. It's going to take you an extra turn to utilize those fetch lands as long as you have Thalia on our side of the battlefield. Staying with the CMC of 3, we have General Ferris Rokirik, a 3/1 for 1 in Boros colors. He has hexproof from monocolors, so there will be no Swords to Plowshares. There will be no Doom Blades. There will be no Paths to Exile that are going to be able to target this general. And whenever we cast a multicolored spell, we will create a 4/4 red and white Golem artifact creature token. This is not in and of itself a dedicated multicolor build, but there are certainly enough multicolor cards in the 99 of this build so that we can benefit from General Ferris's cast trigger many, many times throughout a game. Speaking of which, here's General Kudro of Drannith, 3/3 for 1 in Orzhov colors. This acts as a human anthem as long as he's on our side of the battlefield, giving them +1/+1. And whenever he or another human ETB is under our control, we can exile a target card from an opponent's graveyard. Not that graveyard utilization is a big thing in our format, correct? Oh, it sure is. And lastly, General Kudro has an ability that allows us to pay 2, sacrifice 2 humans, and destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Now, this is not a dedicated human token build. We're going more legendary humans because of the different synergies that we can get throughout the 99 of this build, in addition to the creature that's sitting in our command zone. So if there is a creature that really needs to be removed that has power of 4 from the battlefield and we can destroy it, we're going to have to think long and hard if we want to sacrifice 2 of our legendary humans to do so. Next up, we have Tajic Legion's Edge, a 3/2 haste for 1 in Boros colors. It has the Mentor mechanic, and whenever it attacks, we will put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. More importantly, Tajic prevents all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures we control. So if an opponent casts Blasphemous Act and we have Tajic on our side of the battlefield, Tajic will die, but the rest of our creatures will not. And we may pay Boros colors to give Tajic first strike until end of turn, which is a great way to try to preserve him during combat if he's trying to be chump blocked. Alright, next up we have Tymna the Weaver, 2/2 lifelinker for 1 and Orzhov colors. At the beginning of our post-combat main phase, we may pay X life, where X is the number of opponents that were dealt combat damage this turn, and if we do, we draw X cards. So Tymna follows the line of Niambi and Reki, not so much with what Sisay does, but Tymna's going to provide us opportunities to get more cards into our hand, which will allow us to cast more humans, which hopefully will allow us to activate Jodah's pseudo-cascade ability. Alright, now we're moving from CMC of 3 to CMC of 4, and our first one is Bruce Tarl, Boorish Herder, a 3/3 for 2 in Boros colors. When Bruce ETBs or attacks, target creature we control gains double strike and lifelink until end of turn. Note the text on that. It does not say another target creature we control. We can give that double strike and lifelink ability to Bruce if needed, if we are sending him into combat all by himself. Next we have is Captain Sisay. This is OG Sisay, folks, the original. A 2/2 for 2 in Selesnya colors. We can tap Sisay and search our library for a legend or legendary card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. This could be any of our legendary creatures. This could be any of our legendary sorceries. If we needed, this could be a legendary land. We're going to get to that later on in the deck tech, but Captain Sisay is going to put some choice cards into our hand just by turning her sideways. All right, next we have Gerard, Weatherlight Hero, a 3/3 first striker for 2 in Boros colors. When Gerard dies, we will exile him and return to the battlefield all artifact and creature cards in our graveyard that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So what this is the anti-board wipe deterrent. If we have Gerard and a host of other creatures on our side of the battlefield, and somebody decides to cast a Damnation, or somebody decides to cast a Wrath of God, or some other kind of mass board wipe, we will exile Gerard, and if they made the haphazard mistake of not knowing what Gerard does, we're going to return every one of those creatures that were just destroyed right back to our side of the battlefield. All right, next we have Grand Arbiter Augustin the Fourth, a 2/3 for 2 in Azorius colors. White spells we cast cost 1 less to cast. Blue spells we cast cost 1 less to cast, and spells our opponents cast cost 1 more to cast. At a bare minimum, this is going to help thin out the commander tax that's going to be placed on Joda, because we can really expect him to take many trips to and from the command zone to the battlefield and then back again. So he is white, he is blue, that will take off 2 of the commander tax. So with Grand Arbiter on our side of the battlefield, that first commander tax is going to be free. And if we slowly shift Grand Arbiter down just for a moment, let's look already at the white and blue spells that we have here that would benefit from this tax reduction. We got Sisay, we've got Thalia, General Ferris, we have General Kudro, Tajik, Timna, Bruce, Captain Sisay, and Gerard. If we were able to get the Grand Arbiter onto our side of the battlefield early in the game, we will reap the benefits of accelerating our creatures onto the battlefield way ahead of curve, and hopefully out-resourcing, out-producing, out-maneuvering, and pretty much just outlasting our opponents. Back to another source of peripheral card draw, it's Joira, Weatherlight Captain. She's a 3/3 for 2 in Izzet colors, and whenever we cast a historic spell, we draw a card. Now, for the purposes of this deck, historic are going to be any of our legendaries, any artifacts, and any sagas. That's what a historic spell is. So for a deck that is dedicated to having a legendary theme, Joira is going to serve her purpose very, very well of putting cards into our hand each time we cast one of those legendary spells. And as a bonus, anytime we cast an artifact spell, and we're going to have some artifact spells to talk about, she's going to put a card into our hand as well. Next, we have Wrath Capuchin, Ship's Mage, 3/3 flyer with flash for 2 in Azorius colors, and this also takes our historic theme a little further into our favor. We may cast any of our historic spells as though they had flash, which means all of the spells we just talked about with Joira, all of our legendaries, all of our artifacts, perhaps a saga or two, they all have flash. So Wrath Capuchin is going to really, really cause some headaches for our opponents, because they're never going to know when we're going to plop down one of our legendary creatures. Next, we have Marchesa the Black Rose, a 3/3 for 1 in Grixis colors. Marchesa has the Dethrone mechanic and gives other creatures we control Dethrone as well. Dethrone, of course, meaning that whenever a creature with Dethrone attacks, if that creature is attacking the player with the most life or tied for the most life, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. And whenever a creature we control the +1/+1 counter on it dies, we will return that card to the battlefield under our control at the beginning of the next end step. So this again is going to help preserve the health of our selected legendary humans on a much grander scale than Niambi could. Remember, Niambi flashes in and saves one of our guys. Marchesa is going to come down and she's going to say, as long as you have a +1/+1 counter, you're going to be saved if you end up you're going to be saved if you end up hitting the graveyard. If Marchesa 1.0 is good enough for this build, then so is Marchesa 2.0. We have Queen Marchesa, a 3/3 for 1 in Mardu colors. This version of Marchesa has Death Touch and Haste, and when she ETBs, we become the Monarch. And if we have the Monarch at the beginning of our end step, we get to draw a card. And of course, if any opponent deals combat damage to us, they will take the Monarch away, and then they will have the Monarch. And lastly, at the beginning of our upkeep, if an opponent decided to take the Monarch away from us, we will create a 1/1 black assassin creature token with Death Touch and Haste. That will be a great way to send that creature shrieking into combat, and if our opponents have nothing but biggins on their side of the battlefield, they may think twice than blocking down a 1/1 Death Touching with a 1/1 Death Touching and hasty creature, and then just give us the Monarch right back. Queen Marchesa is going to offer another way in which to gain peripheral card draw. Remember, in a tribal deck, we want to maintain tempo throughout, and Queen Marchesa with the Monarch is going to help us do that. For the exact same mana value, we go from Queen Marchesa to Shanid, Sleeper's Scourge, a 2/4 with Menace for 1 in Mardu colors. Shanid gives other legendary creatures we control Menace. How wonderful that all of the creatures we've discussed so far in this build are all legendary. Whenever we play a legendary land or cast a legendary spell, we draw a card and we lose 1 life. Again, more peripheral card draw. This time we have to jump through a couple more hoops and lose a life each time. But again, any way that we can get cards into our hand is going to be much appreciated. In addition to Shanid's mass combat enablement of evasion in the form of Menace, in a deck that's going to win via combat, as we're going to try to outclass all of our opponents with our legendary humans, any ways that we can give the squad of all of them some form of enablement of evasion, which Shanid does with Menace, we're going to welcome that addition to the 99 with arms wide open. And our last legendary human with a CMC of 4, it's Saskia the Unyielding. She's a 3/4 vigilant hasty soldier, and she costs black, red, green, and white to cast. When she ETBs, we choose a player, and whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to the chosen player. Saskia is going to help us speed up the game. It's going to put our opponents on a clock. And yes, you can pick the same opponent that you're going to deal combat damage to with our creatures, and they'll just end up taking double the damage. Saskia, I think we can consider Saskia to be a win condition in this deck. If we have a big enough, tall enough army of our legendary humans with perhaps some evasion from Shanid or something else, we can put Saskia down onto the battlefield. Maybe we already have Joda, and then we can just clean 2 opponents off of the table with 1 combat step. Our first legendary human with a CMC of 5, it's Kenny, Kenrith the Returned King. He of the litany of so many wonderful and relevant activated abilities. Kenny is a 5/5 for 4 and a white with 5 different color-specific abilities. For 1 red mana, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. There's that evasion that we're looking for right there with the trample. For 1 and a green, we put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. There's a fantastic way to synergize with Marchesa the Black Roses, Dethrone, and Death trigger. For 2 and a white, target player will gain 5 life. That's most likely going to be us all the time. 3 and a blue, target player draws a card. Again, some more options for peripheral card draw. And lastly, for 4 and a black, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. Since we're running a tribal build where the primary win condition is combat, we can expect to see many of our humans fall during combat. Let's get them out of the graveyard with one of Kenny's abilities, give them haste with another, pump them up with +1/+1 counters, and send them right back into combat. Alright, we're down to our last 3 legendary creatures here, and they all have CMCs of 5. Next up, We have Kyler, the Guardian Emissary. It's a 2/2 for 3 in Selesnya colors. Whenever another human ETB is under our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on Kyler. Other humans we control get +1/+1 for each counter on Kyler. So this is going to be a great creature to get out as quickly as we can, and then try to get more and more humans to ETB under our control so that Kyler gets more +1/+1 counters, and then he shares the wealth by giving +1/+1 to each of our other humans for each +1/+1 counter on him. And again, yes, the synergy between Kenrith and Kyler, that can definitely work because Kenny can put those +1/+1 counters on Kyler and make all of our humans bigger each time he does so. All right, our second to last legendary creature here, it is Sen Triplets. We're thinking a little outside the box here because as you look at the theme so far and all of the creatures that we put into this build, so many of them have effects or characteristics or synergies with the team itself. Sen Triplets comes down and it's really going to do more about, they're really going to affect an opponent more than they're going to help out our human team. But depending on what we're able to get on our side of the battlefield, Sen Triplets could indirectly help out the human squad, and let's find out why. For 3/3, the Sen Triplets are 2 in Esper colors. At the beginning of our upkeep, we choose target opponent. This turn, that player can't cast spells or activate abilities, and plays with their hand revealed, and we may play lands and cast spells from that player's hand this turn. So Sen Triplets has a way in which to completely nullify an opponent's presence at the table during one of our turns. And in addition, we get to cherry pick any of the cards from that opponent's hand and lands and play them or cast them, if they're lands or if they're spells, and those both could help to serve the greater good of fortifying our legendary human army. So in an indirect way, Sen Triplets is going to end up being one of the most powerful legendary humans in this build. And our last human here that is of legendary status, it is Surrak Dragonclaw, 6/6 flasher that can't be countered for 2 in Teamer colors. Creature spells we control can't be countered. Other creatures we control have trample. So Surrak will come down at instant speed, provide the protection to not have any of our creature spells getting countered, which will definitely help Joda as he comes out of the command zone onto our side of the battlefield. And he offers this defensive ability and as well the offensive capability of giving all of our other creatures trample, mass evasion and trample, mass protection by not being able to have our creature spells countered. Surrak is a great creature to stop with right here and showcase what we've already put into the 99 of this legendary human tribal build. So far, we've filled about a quarter of the 99 with legendary humans. Now let's take this legendary human theme and let's enhance it even further by talking about a host of cards that's going to provide additional benefits, synergies, and enhancements to this legendary human theme. The first card we're going to talk about is Bard Class. Here we have an enchantment for Gruul colors. Legendary creatures we control ETB with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. You saw earlier that we already have a +1/+1 counter theme kind of woven into this deck, and here is another way in which to enhance it. We can pay Gruul colors once more, and legendary spells we cast cost red and green less to cast. This effect will only reduce the amount of colored mana we pay. At a bare minimum, this is going to help us cast Joda even more quickly. Can you imagine if we had Bard Class and Grand Arbiter Augustin on our side of the battlefield? That's an overall cost reduction of 4 mana for our general. And lastly, to reach level 3 of this class, we pay 3 in Gruul colors, and whenever we cast a legendary spell, we exile the top 2 cards of our library, and we may play them this turn. So, in one card, if we reach all the way to level 3, we end up having legendary creatures that can come down with a +1/+1 counter. We get a red and green cost reduction in all of our legendary spells, and whenever we cast one of our legendary spells, we get to exile 2 cards from the top of our library, which give us another source of card advantage. Bard Class really does a lot of heavy lifting in this deck. Next, we have General's Enforcer. This is a human, but is not a legendary human, so that's why it's here in the legendary human support section, as opposed to being in the legendary human section. It's 2/2, and legendary humans we control have indestructible. It's going to cost us Orzhov colors to get this guy onto the battlefield, and we also can pay 2 in Orzhov colors to exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, we get to create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. As noted earlier, this is not a dedicated human token deck, but it's not as if we're not going to welcome these human tokens with arms wide open. So, General's Enforcer is in this build because it's going to synergize with our legendary humans by giving them indestructible, plus it also gives us a spot card removal effect from any target graveyard, for any target card in a graveyard, and it doesn't even have to be an opponent's. If we need to get a human into play right away, we can exile one of our own creatures and create that token. Next up is Herald's Horn. Here is an artifact for 3. When it ETBs, we're going to choose humans, and creature spells that we cast of the chosen type will cost 1 less to cast. Again, this is going to help reduce the costs of our humans, and at a bare minimum, it's going to make Joda 1 less commander tax when it comes out to our side of the battlefield. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we get to look at the top card of our library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, we may reveal it and put it into our hand. So we got about a 1 in 4 shot of getting a human from our library, on the top of our library, into our hand, and that, on top of the cost reduction, makes Herald's Horn a great card to include, and another peripheral card advantage card to help us maintain tempo throughout the game. And we're sticking very strong, hard, and fast with these cost reducers because we're also going to play with a copy of Urza's Incubator. Artifact for 3, when it comes down, we choose a creature type, which will be humans, and human spells of the chosen type, creature spells, human creature spells will cost 2 less to cast. So you could definitely see that we're trying to make sure, because of how attractive Joda is going to be, from a spot removal standpoint, we're going to hedge against that inevitability by having as many cost reducers that the deck can support. Next up, we have Esika, God of the Tree. She's a 1/4 god with vigilance for 1 and 2 green. She taps for 1 mana of any color, and other legendary creatures we control have vigilance and tap to add 1 mana of any color. In this kind of a build, giving all of our legendary humans the ability to tap for mana again allows us to get Joda onto the battlefield without any concerns of how high the commander tax is. As an additional bonus, and one that is much more powerful in this build if needed, we could also choose to cast Esika's other side, which is the Prismatic Bridge. It's a legendary enchantment for Wooburg mana. At the beginning of our upkeep, we reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Most likely it's going to be a creature. We put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. More often than not, we're looking to put the Prismatic Bridge into play because this is going to give us battlefield enhancements for the one-time investment of 5 mana. And enchantments have much more staying power on the battlefield than creatures do. And that's not taking anything away from Esika's front side, which also could be extremely powerful in this build. All right, ticking up to a CMC of 4, we have Day of Destiny, a legendary enchantment for 3 and a white. It's going to give legendary creatures we control +2/+2. That's a fantastic legendary specific double anthem effect for only a mana value of 4. Continuing with mana value of 4, and our last CMC of 4 in this section of the video is Dihada, Binder of Wills. We have a planeswalker here that's going to ETB with 5 loyalty counters on it for 1 in Mardu colors. To +2 Dihada, up to 1 target legendary creature gains vigilance, lifelink, and indestructible until our next turn. Notice it's not until the end of turn, it's until our next turn. And if we have the benefit of sending that into combat with its vigilance ability, keeping it untapped. It's indestructible, so it's not going to get destroyed during combat. We have the ability to protect ourselves, go on the offensive, and perhaps send one or more of our opposing creatures to the graveyard. For her -3 ability, we reveal the top 4 cards of our library and put any number of legendary cards from among them into our hand and the rest into our graveyard. We create a creature token for each card that was put into our graveyard this way. This ability is absolutely ridiculous. So at the very minimum, we're going to get 4 treasure tokens. And at the very ceiling, we're going to get 4 cards into our hand. And any number of cards and or treasure tokens in between the floor or ceiling of that ability is absolutely fine with us. That -3 ability of Joda is one of the most powerful Planeswalker abilities that we're going to see that isn't a Big Bang. And speaking of Big Bang, we can take 11 counters off of Joda and gain control of all non-land permanents until end of turn. We get to untap them, they gain haste, and then we end up winning the game. Joda is in this deck because of her synergies with legendary spells and cards, and that's just fine with us. All right, next we're going to a mana value of 5. We have an artifact, it's Vanquisher's Banner. It's going to come into play. We're going to choose humans, and humans are going to get +1/+1, and whenever we cast a human spell, we're going to draw a card. Again, Anthem effect for our attacking creatures, and a card draw effect that's going to just continue to run rampant in this build because we want to make sure that we can continue to maintain tempo throughout the game. Another artifact here with a generic mana cost of 5. This is a legendary artifact, and it's Hero's Podium. Each legendary creature we control gets +1/+1 for each other legendary creature we control. Where does that sound familiar? Well, let's shift Hero's Podium slowly down to the left corner of your screen. Yes, that's Jodah's ability. That's Jodah's first ability, except Jodah's first ability will also give it to himself. So we're going to have a double personalized coat of arms here with Jodah and Hero's Podium. In addition, we can pay X, tap this, and look at the top X cards of our library, and we may reveal a legendary creature card from among them and put it into our hand, and we put the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. So we get to filter through the top X cards of our deck, get the one preferred legendary creature that we need, put it into our hand, and hopefully get that bad boy onto the battlefield and leading us to victory. All right, next we have Arvad the Cursed. Now, this is a legendary creature, but it is not a human. That's why it's in this section of the video. Arvad is a 3/3 death-touching lifelinker for 3 in Orzhov colors, and it gives other legendary creatures we control +2/+2. So this is going to work very, very well with Day of Destiny, and if we're able to kind of cast them on curve, one after the other, imagine playing any of our legendary humans and they come into play with a +4/+4 from Day of Destiny and Arvad the Cursed. Next, we have Sigarda, Heron's Grace, a 4/5 flying angel for 3 in Selesnya colors. Now, this is an angel, so again, this is not a legendary human, but she is going to help out humans and us because that's just what angels do. She gives us and humans we control hexproof. We can pay 2 generic mana and exile a card from our graveyard to create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Now again, similar to what we were talking about with General's Enforcer, this is not a dedicated human token deck, but we do have a few effects that will allow us to put onto our side of the battlefield some human tokens, and Sigarda is one of those effects. Now, it will be a card from our graveyard, but notice it does not have to be a creature card. We can exile one of those fetch lands that we're going to see later on in this deck tech to get a 1/1 human on our side of the battlefield. As long as Sigarda Heron's Grace is on our side of the battlefield, we and humans we control are going to have hexproof, which will be a great way to prevent our opponents from spot removing any of them. All right, we're down to our last handful of cards in this section of the video. We're jumping from a CMC of 5 to a CMC of 7 to talk about Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. It's a legendary sorcery for 5 in Orzhov colors. Now, we can only cast a legendary sorcery if we control a legendary creature or a planeswalker. That should not be a problem in a dedicated legendary human build. And when we do cast Primeval's Glorious Rebirth, we return all legendary permanent cards from our graveyard to the battlefield. So this is going to help us sync up with our legendary theme and return each one of those cards from our graveyard to the battlefield as long as we have a legendary creature or Joda on our side of the battlefield. A more direct way, without having to jump through any hoops to get all of our humans from the graveyard back onto our side of the battlefield, we're going to include a copy of Angel of Glory's Rise. It's a 4/6 flying angel for 5 and 2 white mana, and when she ETBs, we return all human creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield, and unfortunately for any of our opponents that have zombies on their side of the battlefield, every one of them will get exiled. We're left with a 4/6 beefy flyer and every human card that was in our graveyard. No need, we don't have to worry about having a legendary creature on our side of the battlefield or a planeswalker. That's just a straight ETB effect for Angel of Glory's Rise. As we continue our trend of getting creatures onto our side of the battlefield from places other than our hand, as Primeval's Glorious Rebirth and Angel of Glory's Rise both mass return a bunch of humans from our graveyard to our side of the battlefield, now let's get them straight from our library onto our side of the battlefield instead, by playing with one copy of Kindred Summons. At instant speed for 5 and 2 green mana, we're going to choose humans because we get to pick a creature type. Then we reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal X creature cards of the chosen type, where X is the number of creatures we control of that type. We put all of those cards onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest of the revealed cards into our library. Of course, the revealed cards that are going onto our side of the battlefield are going to be the humans, and this card could absolutely end the game. At the end of our last opponent's turn, we can cast this. Maybe we have 3 or 4 humans on our side of the battlefield. We cast Kindred Summons, double the number of legendary humans we have, and then suddenly the game is over. All right, and the last card in this section of the video, and it's one of the best cards in this deck for the purposes of protecting our squad and protecting and preserving our legendary theme. It is Avacyn's Memorial. It's a legendary artifact that has Indestructible for 5 and 3 white, and it gives other legendary permanents we control Indestructible as well. The fact that the artifact that's giving everything Indestructible is also Indestructible is going to make it that much more powerful. A simple Generous Gift or Assassin's Trophy is not going to destroy Avacyn's Memorial. Someone's going to need to utter end this or Anguish Unmaking. Something's going to happen to remove it from the battlefield, because if not, its continued presence gives all of our legendary humans and our other legendary permanents Indestructible. And boy, oh boy, you don't have to tell me, and you don't have to hear it from me, how much of an advantage that would be in a deck that wants to win via combat. The following group of cards are a bunch of miscellaneous spells that are going to help us to synergize and enhance and tie everything together in the 99 of what we're trying to do in this legendary creature build. And the first is Swiftfoot Boots. This is an artifact equipment. It costs 2 to cast, 1 to equip. It gives equipped creature hexproof and haste, and its number 1 target is Joda. We need to protect Joda to have him on our side of the battlefield so that we can utilize his Anthem ability and his Cascade ability. Continuing our ongoing trend of card draw, Mass Appeal. We're looking at a sorcery speed here for 2 and a blue, and we draw a card for each human we control. This is a legendary human build. Let's benefit from it by drawing cards for as many humans as we have on our side of the battlefield. For the exact same mana value, and again continuing with the drawing cards trend, are you going to pay 1 for that? Are you going to pay 1 for that? Are you going to pay 1 for that? Or are you going to pay 1 for that? It's Ristic Study. We all know about it. If you're playing against it, it's very annoying to keep hearing that. But it's blue. We're playing blue. We're drawing cards. It's going in. Next spell, Teferi's Protection, 2 and a white at instant speed. This is going to be included as a way in which to preserve our board and our life total. Until our next turn, our life total cannot change. We gain protection from everything, and all permanents we control phase out. After casting Teferi's Protection, we exile it, and that's probably the right call because it's way too powerful of a card to just be sitting in the graveyard. Next we have is Rhythm of the Wild. Again, some more protection for our creatures. This enchantment for 1 in Gruul colors will make sure that our creature spells cannot be countered. Cannot be countered. We're going to be counting them because there's going to be a lot of them. It's countering them that our opponents will not be able to do. In addition, our non-token creatures we control will have Riot, meaning that they can ETB either with haste or with a +1/+1 counter on it. Again, some additional synergies, that little +1/+1 counter theme that we have woven in this deck as a way in which to take more advantage of Marchesa the Black Roses, dethrone and return creatures from dying to the hand. Rhythm of the Wild is going to help with that. It's going to provide the option of haste. It's going to prevent our spells from getting countered. Just a fantastic card in this deck. Ticking up from a CMC of 3 to a CMC of 4, let's play with a Game Ender. It's a Chroma's Will. It's an instant for 3 and a white, and in a deck that is sculpted to win via combat, if we have Jodah on our side of the battlefield when we cast the spell, then each one of our creatures are going to gain Flying, Vigilance, Double Strike, Lifelink, Indestructible, and Protection from all colors. This will end the game. As long as we have Jodah on our side of the battlefield and a host of other humans, we should not have any difficulty at all in saying good game. Let's shuffle up for the next one. More card draw on the way. This time it's Distant Melody. This is going to do exactly what Mass Appeal does, but just for 1 more generic mana. We're going to pick humans, we're going to draw a card for each human we control, and that's that. Going up to a CMC of 5, now it is Kindred Discovery, an enchantment for 3 and 2 blue. When it ETBs, we'll choose humans, and whenever a human we control enters the battlefield or attacks, we will draw a card. Don't forget those attack triggers with Kindred Discovery. Keeping the cards flowing into our hand means that we're flowing them onto the battlefield, meaning that our opponent's life totals are ticking southward with great regularity. All right, just a handful of cards left in this subsection. And we're going to go back to the Graveyard Well once more by playing with a copy of Patriarch's Bidding. Sorcery Speed, 3 and 2 black. Each player chooses a creature type. Each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from their graveyard to the battlefield. A little bit of caution should come in fold here. Make sure you know what's in your opponent's graveyard. You may be playing against a Sliver player, and their graveyard will be a lot scarier than your graveyard. So just make sure that when you cast Patriarch's Bidding, you're doing so coming out ahead of all of your opponents. 2 more spells remain, each with a CMC of 7. The first is Unite the Coalition. At instant speed for 2 in Wooburg mana, we get to pick 5 of the following modes, and we may pick each mode as many times as we want. Either target permanent phases out, there's some more protection for Joda, or target player draws a card, there's some more peripheral card draw effect, or we exile target player's graveyard. Again, we're picking on the graveyards of our opponents. Unite the Coalition deals 2 damage to any target. Those could be our utility creatures. Those could be the auxiliary creatures. Those could be some planeswalkers that are getting annoying on our opponent's side of the battlefield. Or destroy target artifact or enchantment. All of these modes are all ridiculously relevant in our format, and they're all stapled on 1 card for a 7 CMC, which we will never have to wait until turn 7 to cast. With the amount of mana ramp and fixing present in all decks across our format, casting Unite the Coalition ahead of curve and reaping all of the benefits of those relevant modes is going to make that one of the most valuable cards to come out of the pre-constructed Dominaria United commander decks. And our last spell in this section, back to the Graveyard Well once more, it is Eerie Ultimatum. It's a sorcery speed for 2 white, 3 black, and 2 green. We return any number of permanent cards with different names from our graveyard to the battlefield. Because we're playing Commander, we should just further errata this card to say, return each permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, it may seem like we might be going a little overboard with the graveyard shenanigans here, but please keep in mind, we are a tribal build focusing on winning the game through combat. That means there's going to be a lot of attacking, there's going to be a lot of destruction. We're going to see a host of our legendary humans hit the graveyard, including multiple ways to get them back onto our side of the battlefield is only going to help our cause and reach our feat of accomplishments through combat that much quicker. All right, in this part of the video, we are going to zip through all of the removal spells we've included in this build. We're going to identify spot removal spells that help to get rid of any permanent because those are just so much more versatile than ones that say destroy target creature or destroy target artifact. Example. Assassin's Trophy. Destroy target permanent and opponent controls. That could be anything on their board. This is a green and a black. Its controller may search their library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. If the permanent is bad enough, we don't mind gifting an opponent with a free basic land because, let's face it, in Commander, there could be many, many worse things on the battlefield than giving an opponent a free land. Beast Within is 2 and a green. It's going to destroy a target permanent. Its controller will get a 3/3 green beast creature token. We don't care about the creature token at all. We're running humans. They're going to be big. They're going to be bad. And we're going to tame that beast, baby. Beast Within version 2.0, Generous Gift. It's 2 and a white. It destroys target permanents. And we leave behind a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Everything we said about Beast Within will apply to Generous Gift. And our last spot removal spell here, it is Anguished Unmaking. 1 in Orzhov colors, we get to exile target non-land permanent for the cost of 3 life. Sometimes exiling is so much better than destruction, said no one ever. It's always better to exile a card than it is to destroy it. So having Anguished Unmaking in here for the same mana value as Generous Gift and Beast Within, it doesn't allow us to target any permanent, of course, but still exiling a non-land permanent for 3 life, we'll take that every day of the week and twice on Friday Night Magic. All right, 3 mass removal spells. The first is Urza's Ruinous Blast. 4 and a white. It's another legendary sorcery, meaning that we can only cast this if we control a legendary creature or a planeswalker. So we need one of our legendary creatures or a Joda on our side of the battlefield before we attempt to cast Urza's Ruinous Blast. And when we do, we will exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary. Yes, this will touch us a little bit. We will most likely have some non-land permanents on our side of the battlefield that are not legendary. But I guarantee that our opponents will have so many more, making this sorcery for only 4 and a white extremely overpowered in this type of build. Next, we have Austere Command. Sorcery, 4 and 2 white. We can pick any 2 of the following 4 modes. Destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 4 or greater. It's going to be a completely game state dependent decision when we're thinking about casting Austere Command. We're not an artifact deck. We're not an enchantment deck. We're definitely lots of creatures. But if we're sitting across the table and there's a couple of opponents that are running rampant with tokens, it may be worth casting this just to get rid of all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less, leaving the majority of our creatures, of our humans, on board, on our side, and sending all of those tokens straight to the graveyard. And the last removal spell of this section of the video, it's Ruinous Ultimatum. 2 red, 3 white, 2 black. We destroy all non-land permanents our opponents control. So you can see how we really put a lot of thought into the mass removal spells of this build. We're running a legendary tribal human build. We're trying to win with combat. If we need to wipe the board, we don't want to cast a Damnation. We don't want to cast a Wrath of God. We don't want to overload a Dam. We want to make sure that we can have some semblance of survivors on our side of the battlefield so that we can swing in for additional combat damage and not let our board suffer. Urza's Ruinous Blast does that. Austere Command has the possibility of doing that, and Ruinous Ultimatum is absolutely devastating to our opponents if their entire non-land battlefield is sent to the graveyard. Now we bring this deck tech to a close with a review of the mana base. We're going to begin with our mana rocks, then we're going to move to our mana ramp, and then we're going to dissect and examine the land base of this legendary humans build. We're going to begin with Mox Amber. Nothing to cast, it's free. Cast it for 0. It's a legendary artifact. We can turn it sideways to add 1 mana of any color of any legendary creatures or planeswalkers we control. So for example, if we have Joda on our side of the battlefield, Mox Amber will tap for 1 mana of any color. We should not have any trouble at all getting the colors we need to cast the spells in our hand through Mox Amber. Next up, of course, we have Sol Ring, probably the greatest artifact in our format. 1 to cast, turn it sideways for 2 colorless mana. Next up after that, we have Arcane Signet. This is going to tap for 1 mana of any color, and it's okay to say that because we're playing a 5-color build, and our general is a 5-color general. All right, those are our mana rocks now. Oh, actually, we got one more mana rock here. How could I forget about Relic of Legends? It costs 3 to cast. It taps for 1 mana of any color, and we can tap an untapped legendary creature we control, and we can add 1 mana of any color. So Asika, God of the Tree, has an ability here with Relic of Legends. In addition to that, we can also tap it for 1 mana of any color. Very, very nice new artifact from Dominaria United. All right, we have 3 mana ramp spells and then 1 more to talk about. And we're just going to show them all up there at the same... Well, let's do it like this. Let's first go with Farseek. It's 1 in a green. We search our library for a plains, an island, a swamp, or a mountain, and we put that onto the battlefield tapped. More often than not, in the early to mid-game, we're probably seeking to put one of the eventually to be showcased triomes onto our side of the battlefield. The next 2 mana ramp spells, we're going to put them side by side because they do exactly the same thing. We have Nature's Lore and 3 Visits. 1 in a green, we search our library for a forest card, and we put it onto the battlefield. So again, we're most likely going to be targeting our triomes with these spells, or at a minimum, we'll most likely be getting one of our shocklands as we continue to foreshadow what we're going to be seeing when we get to the land base. And lastly, from a mana ramp standpoint, this isn't true mana rampage. This is more mana acceleration, but it is still powerful. It is part of the mana package of this build, and it is Smothering Tithe, an enchantment 3 and a white. Whenever an opponent draws a card, we ask them, are you going to pay 2 for that? You're going to pay 2 for that? And if they don't, we create a treasure token. So it does help us to accelerate our mana. We can't continuously reuse the treasure tokens, unfortunately, because we have to tap and sacrifice them to get the mana, but still, it's worth adding to the mana base of this deck. And that's the last spell. There it is, folks. Here we are. That is the mana base, our mana rocks, our rampage. Now it's time for the land base. We're going to begin with 1 basic land of each color. We've got our plains, we have an island, we've got a swamp, a mountain, and we have a forest. For me, it's always preferable to have 1 basic land of each kind minimally in a deck, because, you know, opponents are going to come with their Path to Exiles, opponents are going to come with their Assassin's Trophies, someone's going to activate a Field of Ruin. You don't want to be the player at the table that doesn't get a land onto your side of the battlefield because you don't want to play with any basics. I know the lure. I understand it. I really do. It's so much cooler. It's so much more elitist feeling to have an entire land base made out of non-basic lands. Don't do it. Play with your basics. Next up, we have 5 of the aforementioned spoiled triomes, and this is going to help us smooth and fix our mana, particularly in a 5-color build. Now, first turn, if you are plopping a fetch land down on turn 1, you are getting a Triome. If you are plopping a fetch land down on turn 2, you are getting a Triome. Those early turn Triomes are really going to help smooth out the colors and make sure that you aren't stuck with cards in your hand that you can't cast because you don't have the mana to do it. All right, other lands that can be fetched in addition to our basics and our triomes, we're going to play with all 10 shock lands. All 10 of them are here, and these are fantastic options because we can get them into play untapped if needed. Remember, the triomes come into play untapped, so it's not always going to be great for us to go 4 consecutive turns to start off the game with 4 consecutive triomes. It's nice to get some shocks into play because we can pay the 2 life, have them come into play untapped, and then start casting some spells, building our board, and start sending our creatures into combat. Boy, we've been talking a lot about fetching so far in this part of the video, so we might as well talk about it right now. These 20 lands, all of them here, the 5 basics, the 5 triomes, and the 10 shock lands, they are all fetchable with these 10 fetch lands. They're all here. We've got the 5 ally-colored fetch lands and the 5 enemy-colored fetch lands. They're each are going to come down. You could tap them to pay 1 life. You search your library for one of the land types indicated by the card. Again, turn 1, you're looking for a Triome. And then you're going to start building your mana base. You're probably eventually going to shift away from triomes to shocks or maybe even basics if needed. But that's what you're going to do as a way in which to build up and fix your land base. All right, well, all that's left are a handful of another non-basic lands that are going to give us all kinds of different colors. We'll go through them real quick. We all know what they do. Command Tower is the best land in our format. It will tap for 1 mana of any color. Reflecting Pool, it will not be difficult to have Reflecting Pool act as Command Tower number 2 because we're going to have every color of lands. We're going to be able to generate every color from our lands. So Reflecting Pool will just do the exact same thing as Command Tower. Exotic Orchard may be a little bit trickier to have that happen, but we're going to get 1 mana of any color from any land an opponent controls could produce. And if we're sitting with at least 3 opponents, it seems likely that we should get 3 to 5 colors very easily. Path of Ancestry will come into play tapped. It'll tap for 1 mana of any color, and when we use that mana to cast a legendary creature spell, when we use that mana to cast a human spell, we get the benefit of scrying 1. And then we have Plaza of Heroes. This has a host of abilities. Going to tap for a colorless. It'll tap for 1 mana of any color that we can use only to cast a legendary spell. It'll tap to add 1 mana of any color of any legendary permanent we control. And we can pay 3, tap this and exile it, and target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And lastly, it's Cavern of Souls. Some more color fixing, some more protection by not allowing our opponents to counter our creature spells as long as we use the color mana generated by Cavern of Souls to cast it. And there you have it, MTG BC. This is Joda the Unifier, a 5-color legendary human build. I look forward to hearing your comments in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.